at Coalesce, we've seen kind of 6 major paradigms or problem statements kind of emerge over time. The first is that complex pipelines are really time consuming to build. The more complex they are, the longer they take to write. And especially historically, before we had AI agents really assisting us in that development, that was especially exacerbated in terms of how we were developing pipelines, just because it does take time to develop things that are useful and provide value for the organization. And on top of that, when there's complexity, it can be really difficult to kind of maintain and scale those pipelines, especially when it comes to things that are more complex and trying to understand how you're going to be able to manage things. For example, maintaining and scaling those projects or those pipelines becomes really difficult to do. And on top of that, the standardization and governance, when you're trying to grow those pipelines environments, typically becomes pretty difficult to manage. And with that standardization and governance sometimes lacking in those environments, really kind of becomes the Wild West when it comes to the data transformation landscape within organizations. And that often leads itself into a lot of tech debt. We have all these things that have been developed over time that have been written by a lot of different engineers that are at different levels. And it just becomes a relatively large pile of tech debt that the organization then has to determine how they're going to prioritize. Are we going to try to work through some of that tech debt? Are we going to try to continue building on top of it and refactoring it as we go? How are we going to go about developing our data pipelines and try to provide value with our data organization with the tech debt that currently exists? And like I said, when you have that tech debt, deployment and change management becomes pretty difficult to do, because you don't know if you're going to update a specific column within a model, if it's going to break 3 other models or break all the columns that lead all the way to a dashboard, for example. Which kind of leads into the last point here, which is really poor visibility and data into the data lineage, and really the ability to perform any sort of impact analysis within your data pipelining solution, especially with more traditional ways of writing pipelines like stored procedures. You really have to be able to manage things really, really, really tightly to understand exactly what's going on. And a lot of times that exists in one or maybe a couple different engineers' heads. And if they end up leaving the organization, that becomes a problem for everyone, because they don't have that tacit knowledge that existed in their head about what actually existed in the pipeline itself. And so that's kind of the problem and the bottleneck that we're trying to help solve for in an automated way here at Coalesce.